All right, so I'm so lucky to have with me today the CEO and chairman of Solar Window, Jatinder Bhogal, or I think you've been nice enough to let us call you Jay.
Thank you.
So Jay, tell me, before we get into the whole scoop or whatever, I'd love to know a little bit of background about you and how you joined Solar Window.
I've been involved with Solar Window since inception, since the very beginning. And at the time, there was a research scientist who had approached a group of investors, and I was in the room at the time. And he had this idea of having a patient ingest silicon nanoparticles, which would photoluminesce. In other words, if you could imagine almost like tiny little fireflies that you would ingest, and somehow this was going to help with medical imaging. And while the idea itself just seemed like a spectacular departure from anything that was out there, we were a little perplexed, and it just didn't quite add up and didn't make a lot of sense that you had these tiny particles that were really generating electricity that could pass through the blood-brain barrier. God knows what would happen if you had electrical charges going off in your brain. And you know, we actually stepped away from it. And it never came back for some time. And then all of a sudden, in fact, our lead investor came back and he said, you know, what would happen if we took this material, which appears to be transparent in many ways, you know, what would happen if we just poured it on a piece of glass? And it was perhaps some of that naivete on our part, and it was some of the serendipity, I think, and you know, just good old-fashioned good luck, running into an opportunity, perhaps repurposing that core discovery that this one scientist happened to have, and thinking to ourselves, maybe we could do something different. And from that, the idea of what we used to call back then a nano power window was born. And of course, today with Solar Window, we're now a much different company. We've formalized a little bit, certainly come a long way since the early days, and have discovered, I think, some really exciting ways of applying what we call liquid electricity to flexible plastics, to glass. And our mission, as you know, is to turn ordinary surfaces into electricity-generating products, and I think we're well on our way to doing that.
What an interesting beginning for something that seems almost so simple sounding compared to something that's going to go into your bloodstream. So what is Solar Window, and like how does it actually work?
Solar Window, and it's a bit of a misnomer because I think oftentimes most of us have the impression that as a company, we've set out to ambitiously turn skyscraper windows into electricity-generating glass, which is part and parcel of what we're aiming to do. And that was certainly our motivation, I think, at the beginning. And we're no different than any company, any technology that I think evolves from a core foundational technology to then evolving to becoming a product. What we've developed is a platform that allows for plastics, glass, whether rigid or flexible, to suddenly start generating electricity, and do it using an organic coating, earth-abundant materials. And what's absolutely brilliant, and I credit our scientists, our engineers, our folks that really have had the vision, and what we've developed is a coating that's 1/100th the thickness of a human hair. There's approximately 4 or 5 layers that we apply. This is all proprietary. We have, I think now, just going off the top of my head, around 120 patent claims around the world, in the United States, throughout Europe, in China and elsewhere. We have another 200. This company's in motion. We have another 200 or so that are currently in process. And what our technology allows you to do is to take this organic material, organic liquid coating, apply it to these different surfaces, and suddenly you have electricity generating on those surfaces. So let's just think about that for a minute. What this means is that you no longer need to strap a solar panel onto the rooftop of a car in order to contemplate the idea of an electricity generating vehicle. You no longer need to think of a very heavy, cumbersome, albeit I think highly efficient and increasingly efficient conventional solar panel that may contain, for example, toxic metals, heavy lead and other materials that I think most of us are trying to get away from. And instead, if you can visualize surfaces that we've never seen generating electricity before, including indoors, and we'll get into that hopefully a little bit later. These are places where solar has never been able to go before. And if I can be so bold, if we turn the clock back a little bit and you think about your cell phone, and if you think of the early days of the cell phone, and most of us would think, well, why do I need a phone? And you'd ponder that for a minute. And I think, Zach, what you'd say to yourself is, I need a phone so I can make a phone call. And then someone had the brilliant idea of saying, wait a second, if you're going to make a phone call, let's add a directory to it so you can actually find the phone numbers, right? And then someone said, hold on a second, what if we put a camera in this thing? And most folks of my generation turned around and said, what kind of craziness is that? Who puts a phone with a camera? This is lunacy. It's unnecessary. When I want a camera, I go get my camera. In other words, we never perceived the need for having this concept of mobility, this ability to capture moments in our lives, to recall these moments, this ability to actually have photography and memories available to us in our hand, in the palm of our hand. And likewise, I think a lot of us, me included, for the longest time, never imagined that the walls in our living room, that the boardroom tables in our offices, that these surfaces could potentially be generating electricity. Never imagined that. Perhaps we've never contemplated that with the electromobility movement, with the idea of autonomous vehicles coming before us, the very concept of having potentially a non-hackable power source that could potentially be able to immediately provide signaling, emergency GPS, emergency response could be activated through this direct form of electrification that could be powered from the sunroof of the car. The ability to extend the driving range of a vehicle, of a big rig, of a truck. These are things that we've perhaps contemplated more as science fiction, and now they've become science fact. So when you ask, what's the implication, or where do we go with solar window and with liquid electricity, I see us moving far beyond the concept of electrifying the glass on buildings, although certainly it's a very compelling business proposition, and it's one that we continue to pursue. I find at the same time it's important to remember that what we have is a product that's evolved far beyond a single product concept for a building, and has now really evolved to become a platform technology.
So
Wow.
this is, yeah,
You got our attention.
my mind is unfolding as to the ideas of what you could do. So, essentially, you have a coating, and it's transparent, which is nice because you can put it on windows. If it weren't transparent, it would, okay, you can't do windows, but you could still do walls. So let's just say I want to take a concrete wall, southern facing on my house or something like that. Can I just get a can of this magic stuff and just slop it on there, and then just attach a couple wires? I'm sure it's a little bit more involved than that, right?
Absolutely. This is a complex chemistry. What we're doing is advanced material sciences, and if you were to strip away the sizzle, and if you were to uncover the steak, what's the secret sauce here behind what we do? It's a combination of the application. First of all, it's the formulation of these coatings. It's knowing what characteristics we need to be prevalent in these coatings so they can be applied in certain ways. And that's a second part. The coatings on their own are no different than, for example, you could have the cure to cancer, but if you can't put it in a syringe, or if you can't deliver it to the patient, it's not really doing much sitting in the vial. So I think in many ways, I see our liquid electricity the same way. Yes, we can have a liquid coating that generates electricity. It's actually the processes through which we lay it down that makes it a complete product. And then there are various other processes that enable the electrons to move and for electricity to be generated, and ultimately to be taken off of that glass or off of the plastic and run through a wiring system so that it can be directed to wherever the need is. One aspect of your question, though, I think is really cool. When you mentioned south facing, and let me sort of, if I can. So why is it that you picked south facing for your question, for your illustration?
Well, making the assumption that we're in the northern hemisphere, you get the most sun exposure, anything that's southern facing, because the sun is usually in the southern half of the sky, right?
Makes absolute sense for conventional solar. It makes absolute sense. One of the advantages we have is that unlike conventional solar, which of course, as you know, is dependent upon the angle of irradiance of the sun, and again, I don't want to knock conventional solar because I think that's, we stand on the shoulders of giants that have come before us, and this is one of those giants. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing if it wasn't for the cadmium tellurides and the SIGs and the amorphous silicons and the polycrystallines and everybody else that's come before us. At the same time, every technology has its advantages. They all have some gaps and opportunities, and I think we are able to fill in some of these gaps. So to your illustration about the south-facing wall, one of the advantages we have is that we can actually function from dawn to dusk. So just keep that in mind. Well, why is that important? Well, it means that we do not need direct sunlight. Instead, we're actually able to work from reflected light, indirect light. So by the way, what's reflected light for some of our audience that may not know? I didn't know, someone had to show me. So if you can imagine two buildings that are next to each other, and if we can just visualize how the light would bounce off of one tower to the other, that's reflected light. The advantage we have is not only do we function in natural sunlight, direct natural sunlight, but also indirect light, reflected light. We even work indoors. Now, each of these applications, and so indoors under artificial light conditions, each of these applications will have their advantages and disadvantages, and of course, maximum power that can be derived and then lower power. Nonetheless, what it does is this opportunity through our liquid electricity opens up applications and electricity generation where it's never been available to us before. So I would just say that while we've traditionally contemplated south-facing as our opportunity, I think what we can look at now is east-west, north-south, two buildings against each other where there's just a little bit of light and so on. To get back to your question, how would we actually apply this to one of the walls on the outside of your home or on the outside of a building? And I think a good application just for us to contemplate is a warehouse, for example. And there's an application where you do not need transparency per se. And by the way, non-transparency is our friend. It's always going to be our friend. We have to accept the fact that the more light we're able to absorb, the more energy we can absorb from light, the more power we're going to be able to generate. Traditionally, rooftop systems on warehousing have played a very important role, and I think they've done a great job. However, we have oftentimes thousands and thousands of square feet around the perimeter of the building, the walls. And because they're vertical, and because the sun just does not hit them at the right angle, these panels are simply unable to produce enough power to make them financially feasible. And that's one of the advantages we have is we're not dependent upon this angle of irradiance dynamic that we have in conventional solar. I hope that helps.
Interesting.
This kind of leads me to the question then that a lot of people are seeking the highest percentage efficiency panel they can find. They're willing to pay through the nose to get that panel.
Or they're willing to wait years and years. We've heard from even many of our viewers who are like, should I get solar now or should I wait? Because I think in 5 years the efficiency is going to be higher. And oftentimes I'm like, well, what makes the most economic sense for you now? Like, why wait a couple of years? Sunlight is just being reflected and absorbed by the roof of your house. What are you waiting for? So you're almost, what you're talking about here is that, while, liquid electricity might not be as efficient as, say, a solar panel, it can go in places that regular solar panels just aren't economical.
And I think it's not just economics, it's also the practicality, where our need is. So just getting back to the whole concept of a cell phone with a camera. If you need a high definition 8K movie production that you're going to do, then probably your cell phone camera is inadequate. But for the day-to-day, pictures of your kids at their birthday, it's just fine. And I think sometimes what we forget is that we have in our lives power all around us. I mean, the one constant that humanity's had from day one through all eternity has been energy. Whether it's thermal energy or whatever the source was, and we forget that we have we might be sitting in a room and you've got somebody with a pacemaker with an embedded battery in it that's producing next to nothing in terms of any voltage or amperage, next to nothing. And then that same person may have a cell phone that has a battery and it's producing a different amount of power. You may go out to your car and it might be an electric car, and suddenly you've got a lot of power in there, comparatively speaking. So I think what it is we've been programmed, and again, this is the evolution of any technology. We've been programmed, I think, to think in terms of efficiency, when what we should really be looking at is the practicality. And I think we ultimately do. All of us ultimately migrate to the convenience and the need. Is this technology able to fill a need? And in short, I think that we're just not aware yet that the walls inside buildings, the outer surfaces of buildings, our vehicles, buses, trains, aerospace applications. One of the areas that we've been digging into, and I was reminded, I don't know if you're aware, but we have a 10-year relationship through a cooperative research and development agreement at Solar Window with one of the world's most advanced research programs through the U.S. Department of Energy at the National Renewable Energy Labs. And one of the folks there the other day was reminding me about how our particular approach, using this organic photovoltaic, is far better than conventional solar panels that are, for example, sent into extraterrestrial, into space, and into high altitude drone or high altitude unmanned aerial vehicles, as they call them. Why? Because of the impact of thermal cycling and radiation cycling on those panels and the degradation it can cause. In our case, for example, in those applications, heat happens to be our friend. We actually work more efficiently the hotter our material gets. So there are all kinds of applications. I'm sitting here with my laptop in front of me. Imagine my laptop being able to produce power, enough power that it can extend the battery life on my computer. And I think we just haven't gotten to that point yet where we can see and we can actually experience a lot of these opportunities for power. So there's a natural tendency, Jesse, I think, for folks to dwell purely on power conversion efficiency. Incidentally, that is our mission for 2021. I think you're going to hear more about our power conversion efficiency in a big way. As you know, we're a public company, and I'm somewhat constrained due to Regulation FD, but that's no secret that power is our friend, and we intend to make it a key feature of our performance and our messaging this year.
I think a lot of people kind of want to get some numbers, though. They want to wrap their head around this. And I know that on your website, I saw something about that if you had a building, it would be possible to get 50 times more power out of solar window system than it would be to put traditional solar on the roof. And that really caught me because I was like, what? So could you explain, I mean, did I read that right? Is that possible?
So yes, you did read it right. And I think all of us need to take one step back for just a minute. So if this was a skyscraper, this was a 40-story building, we have the guys, the Panasonics, the GEs, the First Solars, who are basically battling over the rooftop. So on a 40-story building, you have roughly 3,000 square feet of usable space. And I'm being quite liberal with that number. Don't forget, you have HVAC systems. Oftentimes you want to put gyms, rooftop bars, and so on. So it may not be available. Let's assume it is. You have 3,000 square feet of rooftop space to put conventional solar, which is going to work somewhere, depending on your geography, between 2.5 to 4 hours per day, depending on the angle of irradiance of the sun. Mm-hmm. 3,000 square feet, we have 6 acres of glass on the same building. And let's go a step further. The other advantage we have is we're solution processable. We're liquid. This is so important. If you can visualize for a moment a half a teaspoon of liquid poured onto a piece of glass that's 3 feet by 3 feet. So if you have a 3 foot by 3 foot dimension, we need roughly half a teaspoon of our liquid coatings in order to generate power, meaningful power. And by the way, in our independent modeling, what we've been able to demonstrate is that you have a 1-year financial payback. That's the key. And I think, Jesse, you talked about that earlier, where folks are fixated on how much power do I get. I think building owners are fixated on how quickly does it pay for itself. Mm-hmm. I think that's what really matters to them. And this is our value proposition. It's the fact that we don't need to manufacture under conditions which add tremendous cost. That's the advantage of having liquid coatings. And as you know, ultimately chemistry is cheap. It's the development of that chemistry that's expensive, but once you produce that chemistry, it's a very low cost value proposition in the manufacturing cycle.
Now, I invested a few years ago in Solar Window, and I know that a lot of investors have been approaching you, pretty much knocking on your door and like, okay, when's it ready? I'd like a bucket of that for my house. And
Sure.
so when can they start to see some kind of product that they can buy? Because I know they're just chomping at the bit to get their hands on it.
Great question. So up to 2020, I would say the past decade for us has really been an evolution from early discovery through to invention of early prototypes, through to testing. And when I say discovery, it's important to remember something. When I first went out and met with groups of physicists, this is over a decade ago, I actually met with 6 different physicists to get their take on what we were doing. And they said, "You're crazy. You're trying to defy the laws of nature. This is the equivalent of defying the laws of gravity." And the reason they said that is because every solar panel in the world looked like that. It was black. And so the idea of having a solar panel that could look like this just didn't make any sense. You need to harvest the photons of the sun, or you just cannot do this. And I was reminded when I was speaking with these physicists, Zach, I asked them a question. I said, "Look, you say that we're trying to defy gravity, and interestingly enough, there was a time when we believed that what goes up must come down. And I just hopped in a metal tube, traveled 2,000 miles to come and meet you. And that tube went up and came down when we decided it was going to do that. We call it flight. And until Bernoulli discovered the concept of lift, we would have thought it was crazy." When I say that we went through a decade of invention and discovery, it's because it's not as though we were trying to be a Burger King to a McDonald's, for example, where there's an existing franchise and we can kind of learn from the processes and replicate and perhaps re-engineer a little bit of what was done. We really had to start from scratch. We had to invent every phase of this technology from inception to where we are today, including, for example, a common question I get, "Gee, how do you get the electricity to travel within the glass and then get it off the glass?" We had to invent what we call invisible wires, a matrix that allows a system that allows for us to actually get that energy off of the coatings and direct it to the edge of the glass. Every aspect of this was invented. So for the first decade, our focus was discovery, invention, ensure that we have patentability and protections, be able to demonstrate the viability of our technology, and then productization. How do we actually productize what we have? Last year, 2020, mid-last year, about 6 months ago, represented a major turning point for Solar Window, and I think you see some of that reflected today in some of the optimism with what we're doing and some of the support that we've had. It marked the point at which we had raised sufficient capital, and were able to we had a turning point where we were able to demonstrate a 3-foot by 3-foot window that was actually generating power. That was for us a very, very important moment. We had to get past this one particular obstacle. And if we didn't get there, we were going to have a problem. I think we have some very devoted, very loyal scientists and engineers. They worked through the constraints of COVID, which, as you know, it hit us by March. And yet by May, they actually broke through this barrier. 60 days later, I joined the company. I've served on the company's board for approximately a decade and been around Solar Window at different capacities. This is the first time in 30 years that I've ever joined the executive management team of any of our funded ventures as the CEO. So to your question, when will we see this as a product? I think what you're seeing right now is the company gearing up exactly for that. We've, as you know, we've established our offices in Korea, in Seoul, South Korea. And unlike, I think, some of the conventional thinking that may be out there that, Solar Window should be building its own factories and its plants and this and that, I think we want to be a little more forward thinking. I think for us, our priority is to be able to productize what we have, to mass produce a set of coatings and to mass produce our applications and our products. in a marketplace where complex manufacturing of chemistry and coatings is done on a daily basis. And to us, that's in Korea and South Korea. It's number one on the Bloomberg Innovation Index. So this has been our priority, has been to establish the management team, have all the elements in place so we can be set for manufacturing. And I think you'll hear more about that in the upcoming quarters from Solar Window.
So we've heard recently about Apple and Hyundai. They're supposedly working together on, Apple's new autonomous car. And it gets me thinking here that if you can use Solar Window on a building, is it possible that this would be a good use on an autonomous vehicle?
Automotive vehicles, autonomous vehicles, mass transit, buses, for example, offer us a tremendous amount of rooftop space. Believe it or not, recreational vehicles are another market that I think is largely overlooked. Marine applications are another. High-speed rail, and of course aerospace and air travel is another major market for us that I think is entirely untapped that we should be getting behind.
Because we were just talking to the co-CEOs of Aptera. They're working on that Paradigm electric vehicle that can. One of the versions can get 1,000 miles of range. And one of the questions that came up from one of our Now You Know Investor Club members was, hey, have you looked into putting solar on the windows as well? And they said, well, we looked into it, but at this time it doesn't seem to be economically feasible. And I'm thinking, well, maybe they just didn't know about you guys. So would Solar Window, would this be a good partnership to do?
I think we're open and we're receptive to all kinds of opportunities. And I think oftentimes there's a bit of a misunderstanding, which is or miscommunication, where we often feel that the actual glass itself needs to be coated. And just keep in mind, you've heard about this back late last year, we had an important breakthrough on being able to manufacture on roll to roll. And this is key. And if you go back through our history, you'll see from time to time we kind of allude to this. And if you sort of connect the dots, it becomes kind of obvious what we're trying to do. I think the holy grail for us is the ability to mass produce on a roll-to-roll system. What is that? It's where in the old days, you'd see the printing presses that were going, miles of newspaper every day that would come through this roll-to-roll. Well, it's more or less the same system. Semiconductor industry uses it. The OLED industry uses this for mass production. We envision being able to manufacture sheets of plastic, which are generating electricity, sheets of flexible glass potentially, which we've already worked with. And for those that are unfamiliar with flexible glass, it's actually a sheet of glass that is about the thickness of a business card, and you can actually fold it down to about a 1-inch radius. So just imagine a sheet of glass that can actually be folded like this, and it springs back to shape. In the work that we've done, we've been able to generate electricity, fold that glass down to a 1-inch radius, open it back up, and it's still working. So why is this important? Well, once you have a sheet of plastic that generates glass, that sheet of plastic can be laminated. It can be inserted between two sheets of glass, which are then brought together. And that's, of course, how you have laminated glass. And the sheet in the middle, of course, is generating electricity. Now, for those that think this is something novel or something different, of course, the novel part is being able to generate electricity on that plastic. What's not novel, however, is that this is a perfectly normal, accepted practice in the glass industry. Your security glass, your high-tension glass, glass that goes on skyscrapers and towers, it's all done that way. The vast majority of glass that's put into certain kinds of vehicle sunroofs is built the same way. So if we can think not of just the final product iteration that it can go into a car, whether it's an Aptera or whether it's an Apple car or a Tesla car or any kind of a Volkswagen, whatever it is. Just if we remove ourselves from that for just a minute, we think instead of a sheet of plastic that is ultra lightweight. And why is this important? And it's generating electricity. And the entire coating is 1/100th the thickness of a human hair. Well, why is all of this important? Well, we're not shipping sheets of glass around anymore. So in the glass industry, they call it sand. They say, we got to ship sand around. And what they're talking about is how heavy sand is. So if you can think of the last time you actually lifted a bag of sand, It's really heavy. So think of these sheets of glass. If you think of an architectural application, for example, on windows, glass windows that would have to be shipped from a factory across the ocean, and then you hope that it all stays intact, and then you have to install it and hope it all works, and it's a complex business. What if we could just simply be producing miles and miles of these sheets of plastic, which can then be laminated between the sheets of glass? This is a game changer.
So I'm just trying to picture, if we're either trying to, coat a building with it or a vehicle. I'm just trying to get down to imagining it actually, happening. So assuming that we have a window that has this coating in the middle of the two pieces of glass, because if most people aren't aware, windows have generally more than one piece of glass in it. It's for thermal insulation, so that way the heat doesn't just evaporate out of your window. So there is space to basically put this transparent film with this transparent coating on there. So then, we've put in windows before when we were working on our house, and
you just use a hammer and they're in.
Hammer and it's
You're done.
I'm assuming the electricity, you're going to have to get it out somehow. So there's going to have to be wires. So basically, you'll just have an electrician with the window installer, and they'll be wiring up the windows as you go along.
So the way that we've done our product engineering for window applications in particular, and it's interesting what you said about the thermal and how there's more than one sheet of glass, and for example, an insulated glass unit is what they call it, IGU, and it can be 2 panes or 3 panes of glass, as you know. So what's super exciting for us is that when our coating is applied inside, that glass, what most people don't know is that gap that we see in the middle, in between the sheets of glass, is actually filled with an inert gas. That inert gas helps our coating actually increase its durability and its life cycle. So there's a natural environment which helps us perform even better in an insulated glass unit configuration. With regards to how we would, for example, on a building, how would you connect these windows together and what have you? So years ago, we actually developed what we call a plug-and-play solution, and it's exactly what it sounds like, where you can literally have the windows either in a DC configuration or an AC configuration. We have the flexibility to, for example, have all of the power that comes from an entire floor of these glass windows be directed to a central battery system or energy storage system that might be in a building, or you can simply have the energy redistributed on a single floor, or you can actually use it as a direct source of power right then and there. Whatever the most practical application is for that particular installation, we believe that we've been able to engineer our way through that process, and it's been an important feature to ensuring the practicality of productizing solar window.
So, I mean, sounds like solar window is going to work great on buildings. It's going to work great on transportation of all kinds, ships and cars and trains. Is there any other place that solar window could work that I'm not thinking of right now?
I think that's a great question, and I'm always surprised because we get calls, for example, some of our biggest supporters, of course, are our stockholders, and we get calls all the time from folks in telecom, decision makers in different industries, and as I was mentioning earlier, one of the areas that I think I had put aside for a long time was extraterrestrial, was space applications. I think some of the aeronautical applications that we've always known have held some promise for us, but they were a little bit backburnered. We didn't know quite how to approach them from an engineering perspective. I think in the past few years, we've had some important validation of our technology and of our approach that opens a doorway to, for example, aircraft, commercial aircraft, opens a doorway to space vehicles. And one of the aspects of space travel that we sometimes forget, we all think of folks being in space and everything's weightless. And I think that's kind of the image we have. What we forget is that the average payload costs around $10,000 per pound. Well, you see where the dynamics suddenly shift. $10,000 a pound is really, really heavy and really expensive for putting a source of energy up in space. And if we can do this, rather than doing it for pounds, do it in ounces, bring the cost from hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars down to numbers that make economic sense or even more feasible. And on top of that, if we can provide electrification to surfaces that have not been electrified before, it becomes a game changer. And I think these are some of the areas that we did not traditionally consider, but you may have heard us starting to talk about this a little bit more in the past, I'd say 12 or 18 months.
So I'm just thinking of the Mars base, and of course it's got the dome over it, and usually it's got the big giant solar field with robots cleaning off all the solar panels of the Martian dust. The dome itself could now be generating the electricity, and all the buildings and the vehicles inside the dome and outside the dome.
Well, and to your question though, so I mean, this is a transparent coating, or it can be, and I've seen some video and pictures on your website, and we're probably seeing some now. And this looks great because in most applications, like in office, you don't need 100% transparency. In fact, a little bit of sun shading could be good. But like, let's say I wanted to have a greenhouse with plants in it. Is it possible to coat my windows on the roof with this? Will enough sunlight get through to my plants to grow them, or is it really going to take too much power away?
What a wonderful question. My God, I'm loving you guys more and more. The agrivoltaic sector, as they call it, and it's an emerging market. The idea of providing electrification to agriculture is a relatively new concept. Dr. Xavier Serrat in Spain, who's one of the world's foremost authorities on plant growth and plant biology and the impact of light on plant growth. He's been working with us for some time. And one of the things that excites Xavi so much is that there's this interesting dynamic that happens with plant growth. And so first of all, in short, does solar window have the promise of electrifying greenhouses? The short answer is yes. The nuance to it is that while most of us think about plant growth in terms of optimizing the yield of plants, there are certain applications of plants where you actually want larger leaves to flourish and grow rather than simply more volume of plant. So a good example is the spinach industry. And studies have been done, in fact, they were just published last year, where if you can actually reduce the amount of light that spinach receives, the leaves naturally grow bigger because they're trying to grow. And they do what nature intends them to do, which is let me increase my surface area so that I can bring more nourishment into myself. And of course, if you're going down to the supermarket and you see two bunches of spinach, one has larger leaves and the other doesn't, you're probably going to buy the one that has. So the agricultural market for us is very exciting. There are opportunities, I think, in Northern Hemisphere markets. There are opportunities in new emerging markets, especially where greenhouse applications and greenhouse growth and the greenhouse industry is starting to really come into its own. But we're super excited about this, along with, I think, high-efficiency lighting systems that have been introduced into the agrivoltaic sector, which have really turned this into a science as much as an art form. So we see it as a very exciting application. Thank you for bringing that up.
I heard you mention earlier that you can use this indoors, and my mind kind of just passed that up because I was so focused on the rest of the stuff. But now my mind is like knocking again, like, you can use this indoors? Wait a minute, what?
Right, it's like crazy because, we use a solar panel as our desk, and of course it's not hooked up to anything because it's not really going to generate any appreciable amount of power. But you're saying that you can generate electricity indoors. How?
The key to remember here is we're not reliant on sunlight, we're reliant on light. And that's very, very different, as you know. So the advantage we have is when we're using the energy from the light, it can be artificial light, it can be natural sunlight. I think for us, in terms of indoor applications, what we're primarily going to go after is the applications that require voltage. This is the key for us. I think that we're entering a new phase of building comfort that's going to be driven by sensors, for example, that need to be powered. And the idea of running wiring through your home or through an office, can you imagine if you're in a hospital or an office building or a school, a shopping mall or hotel and you're running wire through the entire building so you can put sensors up, it's ludicrous. And it's equally ludicrous to think that you're going to be changing the batteries on 300 rooms in a hotel. It's silly. So I think for us, the opportunity to create peel and stick applications, which are embedded into sensors and a new generation of technology that enables comfort in ways that we've not seen it, and then to be able to evolve the technology from these point of use, direct current type applications to various other iterations that we've been working on very actively. I think is going to be another exciting evolution for indoor power that's generated using solar window.
All right, so new tech is all fine and good, right? We get a lot of stories that cross our desks all the time about new graphene, super, batteries and so forth. But we've kind of grown a little bit, biased. I mean, Elon has said that it's fun even to build a prototype, but then the next stage is really hard, which is scaling up, and it's even harder to make money when you scale. So is this going to be economically viable? I mean, what's the time frame, and what do you need to scale? And at the end of the day, is this just going to stay in a lab somewhere, or is this actually going to come out into the retail world?
Absolutely, we're coming out. And the reason that I've joined the team, the reason that we've stacked our management team in the course of last year with folks that come from a history of commercialization and productization of new technologies, and is precisely for this reason. You asked another very important question: can we do this in a way that's economically viable, or will it just be another cool toy? And I think that's a fair question. We are driven by the economics in this business. Unlike, I think, a lot of invention and discovery and early startups, for example, that are driven by perhaps the engineers and the scientists, we were founded by entrepreneurs who valued the brilliance of the engineering and the science that came and enabled us to do what we're doing. So from day one, the first question we've asked us is, can we do this in a way where it makes economic sense? And that's the only way that is the only way in which we are moving forward with our product, is with it making economic sense. With regards to our timing, I think one thing we all need to remember is that we're no different than any other business. We're no different than any other evolution of a new technology. And it's funny, you mentioned Elon Musk earlier and his experience with seeing, cool new prototypes, but how do you turn it into a product? Absolutely correct. All of us go through a period of the R&D, then we go through a period of ensuring that we have the intellectual property and we have the protections that we need to have in place in order to move forward. And then what we do is we seek the partnerships. I think that's a major shift in dynamic from how business was done perhaps a decade earlier. A decade ago, the idea of pre-orders was ludicrous. The idea that you would pay for something and hope it arrives, while some folks would put manufacturing in place to actually produce it, just didn't seem to make sense. We were hoping to walk down to our local Sears store and buy something. And of course, now we look back on that and it just seems like eons ago. I think we're no different. We're part of this shift. We're part of this shifting dynamic. We're not interested in building factories where we're producing solar window product. The reason, again, we're in Korea. The number one region on the Bloomberg Innovation Index, in fact, was just ranked number one again for complex manufacturing and for innovation, is Seoul, Korea. And we are there because we believe that we need to effectuate the right commercial and manufacturing partnerships to enable us to mass produce our product cost effectively. So this is the next part of our evolution. And where you can sort of evidence this firsthand is the shift in Solar Window as a company, moving away, I think, from a heavily R&D focused management group to instead folks that are really focused on productization and the next evolution. One of the fellows that joined me when I came on last year in July is John Rhee, and John's a good friend of mine. What most people don't know about John, and he's a very smart guy. He's one of these Yale graduates who went on and served as part of White House counsel many years ago, part of the team. Today sits on the Barbara Bush Foundation, is with the Nobel Sustainability Trust. Really great guy. The one part that they don't know about him is that he was also the head of alternative investments at SoftBank. And you may have heard of this company called Alibaba. And he was actually the lead to drive the Alibaba program at SoftBank That was an initiative where SoftBank put $20 million into that venture. Of course, it became a $60 billion trade. So just keep that in mind. We've been stacking our team with folks that I believe can help us do the next important things that are going to allow us not just to produce a one-off prototype, put some flashy prototypes on a car and create an exciting YouTube video and get some folks excited. That's not building a business. The way to build our business is on a solid foundation. It's by bringing the right folks in. By the way, the other part to that story is when SoftBank invested in Alibaba, there were 5 employees there. And that's perhaps the part that most people don't know. So we're going through the same evolution. We brought in Joe Song as our director of operations in Korea. Joe is a brilliant young man. His last mandate at one of the private equity firms he was with was with as directing operations on the team. 7,000 employees, $3 billion a year company. The last new product that he launched went from 0 to 100 million in year 1. This is the caliber and the quality of the team that we've assembled, and I'm not here, and our team is not here, so that we can do anything short of disrupt the energy space, and do so with what we believe is a breakthrough product.
That is so smart because, I mean, I feel a little privileged here on this channel to talk to a lot of startup companies, and they usually get stuck right about there at the manufacturing phase where they had a great idea, awesome, and they implemented a great prototype, whatever, and then they're like, oh, it's really hard to make this thing at scale, guys. And we're like, yeah. But you guys are saying, yeah, skip that. Don't try and reinvent the wheel and figure out how to make a factory and how to go to the leaders in this and partner with them. And I think that's a really smart thing. But yet most founders, if Jesse and I were to found a company, like, we don't know how to do that. And so it's really cool to hear that you guys have figured out, the right people that do know how to do it. And to that question, I was looking at your team because when I'm investing in a company, I like to see who's running the team. And as I was going through your website, I was like, awesome. And then I see Miss Alexandra Musk. And I'm like, that's funny. Elon has a sister named Alexandra Musk. Could this be the same person?
So Ali is definitely, she's a member of the Musk family, and she's a godsend. She is someone who, in fact, I just spoke with her yesterday about some of the things that we're doing, and she's playing a very important role, I think, in the next phase of our development. There's a reason that Apple is not going out and building its own automotive plant. They could do it in a heartbeat, and they've not done it so far. And there's a reason I think that you're seeing this proliferation of folks who say, you know what, we're really good at manufacturing, and you're really good at innovation and brand building and new product development. Let us do what we do best. You do what you do best. Let's bring peanut butter and jelly together, and let's all have some fun. And I think that's where we are now.
That's really helpful because I got to say, as an investor for the longest time, looking at your website, kind of refreshing, and being like, what are they doing over there? Are they just still working in the lab? And honestly, you got a little frustrated because I think the time frame for many investors is like, they expect something to have happened by now. But it's really invaluable to hear that this is the plan, because it now all the pieces are fitting together in my head, like, oh, this completely makes sense of what their next steps will be. I want to talk a little bit just outside the box here about energy and innovation. For the longest time, I think that we haven't put together the fact that energy drives innovation. And I think we've all been stuck with the fact that if we need more energy, then we have to build another coal plant. So yeah, I guess we don't want to do that.
Or just even the availability of energy within a home. I mean, we have a very, very old leaf blower, right? You plug it into a 110 outlet and you can blow the leaves. But we have a much better battery-powered leaf blower. And the reason that it's better is because it has more energy that you can pull from it than you can get out of the wall. And that's really a different sort of paradigm because you've never been able to do that before. It's sort of a decentralization of power. You'd either need to go to burning gasoline, which is, most leaf blowers are gasoline powered, because if you want a high powered, leaf blower, for example, you have to burn gasoline. There was no battery for you to be able to draw energy from. And it's kind of a similar looking thing here. We've moved in very recent, in this last decade, to be able to actually generate power in your house that isn't a fossil fuel isn't an outside generator that you only, use during a storm. It's something that could be generating electricity all the time. But now we're almost taking another step forward to be able to put that energy generation on anything, as you were mentioning earlier.
Just as an extension of your thought, because you're bang on, and it's our shared experience, I think, amongst all of us, how we're seeing the availability of energy in places that we never saw it before. The idea that you can carry around an electronic device, a cell phone, a laptop that has hours and hours and hours of charge, in some cases days of charge, was a hypothetical at one time, and now it's so normal we don't even think about it. And it's interesting what you said about energy, because and its availability. So if we do a simple, back of the napkin calculation, the sun alone provides us at any given moment 10,000 times all the energy that the planet actually utilizes. So just do the math for a minute. 173,000 terawatts of energy come from the sun at any given moment. The planet utilizes 1/10,000th of that if you add up all the fossil fuels, all the coal, all the solar, all of our gasoline, all of our electricity, everything combined. So the energy is there. What we're having a tough time is figuring out, how can we capitalize on this energy, the abundance of energy? And we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. The human race, we've made incredible strides. If you look at how far we've come, you mentioned coal earlier. I feel indebted to coal. If it wasn't for coal, we wouldn't have electricity. If it wasn't for fossil fuels, we wouldn't have had. We wouldn't have cars, which eventually would become electric powered. So I think all of these energy sources were very necessary, from the first guy that decided to take two rocks together or rub a couple of sticks together, to someone figuring out how to turn it into a matchstick, to us today contemplating the future of energy with solar and with solar photovoltaics. You mentioned graphene earlier, perovskites. These are new generation materials. And speaking of new generation materials, Zach, one of the things, and Jess, one of the things that I think we like to pride ourselves on at Solar Window is that our technology has been built as much on this material chemistry that we have. However, we've really developed what we call our device architecture. In other words, how do we apply those layers in a way that allows us to swap out our chemistry. So and this is really cool, by the way, and I don't mean to geek out on you, but I get kind of excited, sorry. So just imagine if for a minute we have one of those multiple layers, and Jesse, you come up with a better idea. You say, what, I can create a better secret sauce that does the same thing you're doing in that layer. No problem, bring it on, we'll use it. And so part of what we've been working on, so when people say, what have you been doing for a decade? Part of what we were doing, and this is I think one of the distinctions between sort of the entrepreneur side, the business side, versus being purely driven by material science. One of the passions that I think scientists bring and engineers bring is a real belief in what they're doing, but there's also a tendency to get married to it. One of the things entrepreneurs bring, one of the skills that entrepreneurs bring, is the ability to embrace other people's ideas and say, that's a great idea, Zach. Great idea, Jess. Love your coding. I'm going to incorporate it into my product. So when we talk about next generation and we think of the future and we think of the evolution of energy and we think of perovskites or graphene or we think of other materials, just know one thing, that we have built the foundation of our technology so we can swap various aspects of it for whatever the newest, the latest, and the greatest opportunities might be in material science. And that's a key feature behind our approach. And I think it's a key distinction behind what we're doing today versus products that may seem cutting edge, but ultimately they become the Ford Model T. They may have been a barrier breaker, but they don't come with a reverse gear, and they only come in black, and they don't, So this is something that I think is hard for a lot of folks to embrace. There's a certain sense of pride and ownership when you feel that you have the best way. But if you pick up the average cell phone today, very few companies own all the components in those cell phones. If you pick up a laptop or a computer, it's only recently, as you know, that Apple itself has been switching up components that they now natively own or manufacture. And this is an important distinction. It's something I think everyone needs to know. We've been planning for the future from day one. Never, ever wanting to be arrogant enough or letting our ego get in the way, I think, of our mutual success, which comes from embracing the ideas that others may have and technologies that others have, integrating them into our final product.
When I'm looking at a product, I kind of want to be able to touch something or wrap my head around it, or a time frame. Is there any glint that you can give to our viewers as to what they might see first or when they might see it? Because if I was in charge of the company, I think I've heard that it's basically going to be some kind of magic roll. I would think to put it probably in like commercial glass first, because it's a very controlled environment and it's a lot of surface area. So like I would try and go after something that sounds fairly straightforward, as opposed to like going after putting this in Teslas or something like that first. Is that something we might see first? Is some kind of commercial window first, and then it might go into other products?
I think what you're going to see is that our product rollout is predicated not on what we believe is best, but rather by what our customers believe is best. And who are our customers? Our customer is not, and this is an odd thing to say, it's not the consumer. Our customers are actually our partners. So what does that mean? So for example, if it's the automotive industry and the automotive industry wants a sunroof that generates electricity, that is our customer. In turn, of course, they're selling the vehicle to the consumer. The same with the glass industry. We're not interested in building a solar window product. We have no interest in that. Our interest is in providing the power source that can electrify that glass. So if you're a window maker and you're interested in providing electricity generating glass to your customers, if you want to be someone that has a differentiation. And by the way, the glass industry has a major issue. The last major innovation and disruption that happened in the commercial glass space was almost half a century ago, with the invention of float glass. Sir Pilkington in the UK developed a system that allows for buildings to no longer have concrete towers with little windows punched out of them. Instead, now you have floor-to-ceiling glass. That was made possible because of float glass. Since that time, other than some incremental advancements in that industry, and of course UV coatings and various other coatings, there's been relatively little innovation. We have electrochromic windows and all kinds of other applications that allow for tinting of that glass. But I think the idea of generating, the prospect of generating electricity on acres and acres of commercial glass is certainly very compelling. But again, our business model is not to attempt to develop a product which is direct to consumer. I think there are companies and brands and products that do that very, very well. They're already well positioned. Our question is, how do we provide the energy source to electrify those products? That's our sweet spot.
Well, I'm just so excited that I have this job, because I got to hear about this company years ago from one of our awesome viewers, and then I get to talk to the CEO of the company now, and that's all because of our viewers, that they elevate us to the status where Jay actually took our call, but the fact that you're actually here talking to us and exciting me again about, this is what Elon talks about all the time. We want to have something that gets us excited to get out of bed in the morning. And this to me is one of those things, because now I can picture things that for the longest time, we were told, like in residential buildings, don't put too many windows. They're just an energy drain. So just put them as sparingly as possible. And now I'm thinking you might have just changed that paradigm, because now it's like, oh, put as many windows as you want. They make energy. That would be wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us today. This has been just a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. And I want to remind everyone that, please visit us at solarwindow.com. Our 800 number is on the website, of course. Our contact information is there. Reach out. Connect with us. We're here. We're open for business. And Zach, you mentioned that you became a shareholder a few years ago. I remind our management team that every morning when you get out of your bed, the first question you have to ask yourself is, not how do I get more power out of my product, not how do I make it cheaper, faster, whatever. The first question you have to ask yourself is, how do I reward my shareholders, today? That's the first question. If that means generating more power, you go generate more power. If it means reducing cost, you lower cost. If it means a higher throughput R&D program, That's what it means. If it means more patents, you go produce more patents. We are driven by a mission to create a successful business. That is our mission. The electrification of products through liquid electricity happens to be our product. But let there be no mistake, we are not driven by some misguided belief that we're going to somehow create a successful business by fixating on one very narrow part of that business. We have to fixate instead by what's going to reward our shareholders. And shareholders only reward one thing, and that's progress. That's success. We have some of the most patient stockholders in the world, I believe. We have evangelist shareholders who believe in us and who know that we're working. And feel free. You can text me at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's a reason I'm up. It's because our Korean guys are up. They won't let me sleep. And the next day we're up at 6 a.m. But it's not just me. It's all the members of our team. They've been driven in this way for a decade. And you will not hear a lack of enthusiasm or a lack of passion or lack of excitement for what we have. And I think moving forward, you're going to hear a lot more that addresses many of the questions that you asked. And I thank you for your patience, and I thank you for your support. And what more can I say? Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. This has been great. I would love to have you join us on our Now You Know Investor Club at some point, and maybe answer some questions from members that we didn't get to today. I think that would be hugely important. And I just think it's also hugely important for people who are out there right now thinking about going into some business or starting a business. It's been really valuable to hear your experience and how basically you were in the room and an idea came out, and instead of saying, no, that sounds crazy, you embraced the idea, and it didn't immediately lead to anything, but the steps were started right there in that room.
And the evolution that happens after that, and in fairness, because I think we have this romantic look back, and one thing to remember, for me, I have to remind myself, I was actually one of the naysayers. I didn't see the opportunity. To me, the idea of these some guy ingesting, electricity generating liquid just seemed ludicrous. I mean, why would you do this? And I was quite involved in biotechnology at the time. I still am through some other investments that I have. But I was just sort of shaking my head and saying, this is nuts. And could you imagine the FDA trying to regulate something that you're potentially putting in your body and is throwing off sparks in your brain? This is not a healthy thing. But again, our lead investor had for some reason, I don't know why, happens to be sitting in the scientist's waiting room sometime later, looks through a window and asks himself, wait a second, forget this medical thing. That's what we should be doing. But one of the things we realized was that it was kind of unstable when we tried to put it on glass in the way that we did. And a part of me wondered, why are we doing this? Maybe we should give up. And I actually went back to our investors and I suggested that we maybe revisit this out of an abundance of caution, because after all, this is we were a pre-revenue company, we were early stage. Did I really want to put millions of dollars more into this, knowing that we had hit this critical sort of inflection point? And, bless the folks in the room for having the vision, because they actually redirected me. They opened me to an awareness and said, hang on a second, are you telling us that you actually got a spark off of this thing? And it was tiny. It was 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, and we got like a millivolt out of it or something. It was so tiny. But they turned around, they said, you know what, if you got that spark, what would it take to go through the next process? So we actually went back, produced a bit of a project plan. We said, maybe another $5 million. We can take the old kick at the can. These are real numbers, especially back in the day. And so we raised the money and we continued to go on. And little did I know that 2 years later, we would unveil the world's first ever electricity generating glass that was transparent. We did that early, we did that maybe 8 years ago. And it was a tiny little piece of glass, ugly as sin, but it generated electricity. And that was the moment. And then we knew, now we're on a trajectory. So everything after that has been about taking that discovery and turning it into a product innovation, productizing it, raising the capital. As I said, now having the management team in place so we can actually springboard to success. And each of these things has to happen in the correct sequence. You can't have an awesome, management team that creates products when you're still tinkering in a lab. And we also can't do the opposite. So Zach, your timing and the timing of this call, Jesse, you guys reaching out and connecting with us, and giving this opportunity to me and to our company to present to your audience. I value it, I cherish it, and it just happens to be at a key moment, I think, in our evolution. And you'll hear more about that, I promise you. You'll be hearing a lot more about it.
Something I found interesting that you just said there, Jay, was that early on, you thought you had something and you needed $5 million or something like that, which is no small amount of money, but it's not, the biggest amount of money when you're talking big companies. But it was probably a moment where you had to really question, do we want to go down that road? Because that's not, where do I get $5 million? And when we look today at things like this GameStop story of, people just pouring billions of dollars into a company that we all know is not going to go anywhere. It's at the end of its life. And yet just everyone is just piling in, hey, let's invest. I get a little upset because I'm like, well, how are we moving humanity forward by investing in GameStop? I mean, I know you all want to, make a fast buck, but
stick it to the shorts.
And stick it to the shorts. But investing in a smaller company that's working on something that's game changing and that's good. And let's just go back to the good part. What you're working on at Solar Window is something that, if it works, will be fantastic for all mankind. And that's where I want to put my money, because every risk, there's every investment in the stock market is a risk. But here, if my risk pays off, we get something great, as opposed to if I invest in GameStop, I get another GameStop on my block? Like, how do you feel about that?
First of all, I can't offer anyone investment advice. That's not my place. I think what we're experiencing, whether it's GameStop and it's interesting, we were talking about Tesla earlier on, and someone may say, well, gee, where's the equivalency in that? I think there is. And funny enough, Jesse, you're going to say, what does a leaf blower have to do with this? Decentralization, I think, was a word you used. And to me, and you were talking about sort of the decentralization of power, this dependency on a power socket, because now your leaf blower works using a battery, right? So now you're no longer tethered to something that was kind of physically holding you back. And in the same way, I think that many of us are uncomfortable with change. And this is part of the evolution. It's part of the democratization that we're going through. We just don't see it because we're going through it. When we read history books, everything just seems so obvious. So what does this mean in more practical terms? When the internet first came out, I'm not talking about the DARPA days, I'm talking, when the average folk could have access to the internet, we were all concerned. There's too much information. People can build weapons now using the internet. They can hurt people. They can do nefarious things. Our children are going to be exposed to things that they shouldn't be exposed to. There's too much information. And, if it wasn't for the internet, we would not have had some of the medical breakthroughs that we've had. We would not have had some of the fastest engineering in human history that has supported the development of these vaccines for COVID. I was involved with a community online of over 100 engineers, researchers, scientists that were developing ultra low cost devices to help COVID patients in developing countries, developing ventilators and air supply and other related equipment for pennies on the dollar and giving it away for free. That was impossible without the internet. That's democratization of knowledge. It's democratization of information. And I think we're seeing the same thing with blockchain, for example. We're going to see the democratization of finance. Will we need to go to a bank for a loan? I mean, it's just a practical question. Why can't I just connect with Jesse, for example, and if he has $100 that I need to borrow, why can't I just borrow it from him? Why do I need to go to the Bank of Profits, pay them interest when that interest can go straight to you? And of course, that disruption really bothers the folks that profit from these things. And I'm not saying profit's a bad thing. Rest assured, I'm a fan of profits. What I think is uncomfortable, though, to conventional thinking and to conventional markets has been this process of democratization. And we're now seeing it in the energy space as well. Democratization means that you may not need to rely on a utility the way that you had to. Well, that's kind of disturbing, isn't it? If I'm a utility, I've got to think twice. Now, what do I do now? What's my role? How do I play a role in this? And I think the utilities have generally done a pretty good job of positioning themselves, just as we're talking about the coal companies and fossil fuels. What most folks are oblivious to is that the fossil fuel industry has been investing heavily in renewables for the past decade plus. So this is what democratization does. It drives change. It drives institutions to change. And I think we're going through the same process. When you talk about GameStop, to me, it's fascinating. Is it a bunch of guys that are out there to make a quick buck? Is it someone sort of, Jesse, I think you were saying kind of, are they giving it to the short sellers? Whatever their motivation is, what it represents to me is democratization of power. Only an institution used to be able to do that before. And I think the fact that now the masses can invest in the way they want to, good, bad, indifferent, whether it's for quick profits, whether it's to voice their disgust at predatory short sellers, who really are preying on the retail investor. That's who loses in all of this. It's a retail investor that loses. This is part of a natural evolution. And in case anybody thinks it's a new thing, it's not. It's been going on since the 1600s. Go back to the East India, to the Dutch East India Company. In the 1600s, one of the majority stockholders was an activist who went out and raised a voice and started to sort of run this protest within the company and started to sort of have the other shareholders, jostle and make maneuvers and make moves that ultimately today we call them activist shareholders. Well, I think democratization is taking that one step further. You don't need to be a Carl Icahn. You don't need to be a Warren Buffett. You don't need billions of dollars behind you. Or be necessarily a highly sophisticated investor. You can be the average investor and still have impact. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we'll see how it plays out ultimately, but it's certainly representative of the democratization of virtually every aspect of our lives, I think.
It's such an interesting point. And I mean, bringing it back to power and bringing it back to the utilities. I mean, when we wanted to put solar on our house, the utility said, okay, here is the maximum amount that you can put on your house. And we went like, but we could have more and we could have a surplus of energy. And they were like, no, you can't do that if you want to be on our grid. And you actually have to be on our grid in order to have your residency permit. And so, it's what is it?
10 kilowatts.
10 kilowatts. So there you go. And we said, but we're going to have electric cars in a couple of years. And they went, we don't care. It's funny because, they will try to put limits on us, and you'll see that in the financial sector too. That whichever way you believe things went, people became limited in order to, in some cases, service the institution, and so that I think is interesting. But the more tools that we have, just like the stuff that you're developing with Solar Window, can give power to people who typically don't have literally power, like literally actually electricity. People will be able to afford it and have it in places where it wasn't financially viable to build a coal plant and substations and long transmission lines to get out into the middle of nowhere. It was just like, well, whatever, you guys, doesn't matter. Today, with solar panels and with your technology, we can switch to having everyone have a little bit more equity, which I think is really amazing.
Thank you, and it speaks to again an evolution. It's a natural evolution. The idea of dragging an extension cord around everywhere we go and being again tethered to a particular utility, that will go. There was a time when you had to pay a fee to leave your cell phone provider. That day is gone. There's just this natural evolution that happens. The utilities, I don't blame them for what they're doing right now because it's the only way they know how to do business, and it's not an excuse, but it's kind of our reality. I think they've had to also accommodate and change and morph. For this shift where guys like you are saying, look, I'm going to put this rooftop solar on, and hey, I may not need you as much, but I may need you from time to time to still augment my power. And they're saying, but wait, we spent $35 billion running these wires to this grid and doing this, that, and the other thing. It's kind of reminiscent. We all look at the rise of Amazon, for example, and we look at kind of the phasing out of conventional retail. And that's something we're all seeing firsthand. And yet you see a company like Walmart, which has really done a pretty good job of holding its own. You see companies like Costco that have actually grown while this internet and online shopping phenomenon has happened. And the reason you see that is because they have capitalized on that technology. So remember earlier we were talking about solar window and how we built our architecture so we can capitalize on the next best coatings, next best materials. Well, likewise, if the utilities simply open themselves up and embrace these ideas and become part of the solution, then it all works. And in fairness to the utilities, some of the biggest utilities in America are in fact some of the biggest drivers of some of this change. Unfortunately, it will take time, I think, before the average consumer resident or even commercial user of that electricity really sees that happening in the background. But it has been happening for a long time. The utilities have been sort of on the cusp and at the cutting edge of this new evolution in energy. There's no doubt about it.
Well, speaking about that, the democratization of energy, do you think that so we talk all the time on this channel about VPPs or virtual power plants, where a neighborhood or a city's worth of homes could turn themselves into basically a power plant. I see solar window as being a big piece of this, because now instead of just being kind of limited to whatever solar I can get on my roof and some batteries, now there's a whole bunch more places I can put my solar. Do you think that that VPPs, is that something you give any thought to at Solar Window?
The ultimate manifestation of how our product is used is a reflection of whatever the dynamic is in the market at that time amongst consumers, whatever the consumer-driven movement might be. Our focus is to deliver a form of electrification to the folks that might make, for example, a laptop, and how can they create an electricity generating surface on that. It's to align ourselves with the automakers and say to them, we can provide you with electricity generating coatings for your glass. How the consumers or the windows in a home or in an office building, what the dynamic is in the marketplace to leverage that power and how people choose to use that power, I think there's a world of opportunity, and that's probably what fascinates us and excites us the most at Solar Window. When I speak with our engineers, in fact, I'm speaking with them later today. Just the whole idea that we can have a clean, ultra lightweight, organic form of energy, of electricity. And that consumers will be empowered to decide. You are empowered to decide how you want to use that, and what it ultimately becomes. Does it become part of a virtual power plant? Does it become part of a distributed energy system? Does it become a solution in a building? Is it emergency power, for example, for a guy that's driving a big rig? And by the way, that's a very exciting application. On a semi, for example, if you just take the front tractor portion, ignoring the trailer, which is 40 feet plus, just the front tractor alone, we can generate enough electricity there to offset the equivalent of about 1/5 of what the average American home uses in a year. That's an incredible amount of power. Now, how's that possible? I think for one thing, many of us still have this idea that the rig is only going to be generating power when it's driving. Not true. Could be standing still, could be parking, could be doing whatever it's doing. The other thing is it doesn't necessarily need to have direct sunlight. So again, if you had a conventional vehicle and the sun was not tapping the sunroof at the right angle, it wouldn't be working. But in our particular case, we can coat various parts of that rig. And incidentally, when I give you those numbers, they've been modeled not for the entire rig. We remove, of course, the front windshield. That's not something we'd look to electrify for a host of reasons. We remove the entire front of the hood of the rig, because in Europe they don't exist. And so it's a very conservative model. And I believe that it's something that excites us a lot is, again, these applications that have been unavailable to the marketplace.
Jay, we're going to be getting a Tesla Semi, so I know the first stop we're going to be making, we're going to go to upstate New York and park at your house until we get solar installed on it. That would be awesome.
Well, we look forward to working, I think, with all of the glass manufacturers out there, all of the automotive companies, and who that may be and when it might be. I think you'll learn more about that. And it's not to be coy. It's just, I think I have to be a little bit careful, as you know. But nonetheless, like I said before, as consumers, we see a product when it arrives in our hands. We oftentimes don't see the evolution of that product from where it started to where it comes. So this is something that really excites me, the fact that you've actually caught us and we're speaking at this particular inflection point when I believe that we're at the springboard, we're ready to go. And, I look forward to coming back and sharing with you more of what's happening.
We'd love to have you back. And to that point, for those of you who are watching right now and you're kind of curious, I mean, we're not financial advisors. You should do your own research. But the ticker symbol that in the U.S. is WNDW. And is there a ticker symbol for another market? Like, is it on another exchange, or is that the one?
No, we trade only in the U.S. as WNDW. Again, the company, the website is solarwindow.com. And I invite you to connect with us and to sign up for receiving alerts from the company and information from the company. And we look forward to your support. As I said before, our most ardent supporters, our evangelist stockholders, the guys that force me to get up in the morning and get to work and who harass me every night. It's a blessing. I love it. Our shareholders. They're a wonderful gift. We have 15,000 shareholders, which for a small company is a large number of stockholders.
That's really exciting. Well, we'll definitely have you back, because I know that when some exciting news comes from your company, we're going to want to hear it from you. So thank you so much, Jay, for being with us. And just remember that if you want to find out the latest of what's going on, always tune in to the Disruptive Investing channel, because where else are you going to hear directly from CEOs like this? Thank you again, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Disruptive Investing. Be sure to like the video and subscribe. Click the bell button to be notified when new videos come out.